Hey everyone, it's Mr. Wild194. I hope you're doing well today. I have a review here for another manga adaptation of something else that was a novel, or a short story collection in this case, that I did not know that was the case. If I knew the book this was titled after, that it was actually kind of adapting from, I don't think I would have bought it. I saw this randomly at Barnes & Noble about a week ago. I've been buying a lot of books lately. I kind of need to stop because I'm not reading them fast enough with all the movie backlog stuff I'm working throughout 2024. But I am a Star Wars fan, and I'm a huge Luke Skywalker fan on top of that. This is a book that once upon a time when it came out, the original novel, or short story collection, that this is adapting its stories from by different manga creators, mangaka, whatever you want to call them. That book was one that had a red and white cover, and I think it's still possibly in production and in print. I don't know. Never read it, did not want to read it because it's Disney canon and not the OG Legends canon, which is way better when Lucas still owned Star Wars. Anyway, this is Star Wars, The Legends of Luke Skywalker. And like I said, it is a manga adaptation of all of those short stories. It's roughly 200 pages a piece, or in total. It's about 50 pages for all 4 of the stories in here. The first story in here is called The Starship Graveyard, and it's adapted by Akira Fukuya? I don't know. And Takashi Kasaki. It's going to be a really hard video, as you can tell. The next one is I, Droid, which sounded interesting. It sounded like I, Jedi. And, that's probably the best story in the whole book, frankly. That's a really good story for the most part. For the most part is the key phrase there. By Haru Ichi. I don't know. I don't know what any of these people did, by the way. I just wanted to get their names out there because I like to do that when I'm reviewing collections or comic collections or anything like that. The third story in here is The Tale of the Lugubrious Moat, which I hate. I don't know what's worse, the first story or that story. That story is more insulting than the first story. The first story is just boring. Anyway, this is written by Subaru. Not the car, but the person. And then we have the final story, Big Inside, which was kind of okay and meh. It's by Akira Himekawa. Anyway, so the first story in here is the Starship Graveyard that I talked about. This one is basically about a guy who serves in the Empire. And all of these stories in general, the general theme obviously is about Luke Skywalker. This story here was boring. It was about this guy working for the Empire. His ship gets attacked by rebels. I think it's a whole starship. And it gets destroyed, he crash lands, and he breaks his legs. And some guy strolls around, we probably all know who he is, and the guy gets drug around on like a car's hood by this guy, this random stranger on this planet, who's trying to help out a stranger. I think a lot of these stories take place post A New Hope, and many of them post Return of the Jedi, or even one taking place during Return of the Jedi. I'll get to that in a moment. But this particular story, I'm pretty sure, is after the original trilogy. I guess. I don't know. Don't really give a shit. The book is not very good. I don't know what the original short story collection, novel, whatever you would like to call that. I've heard it's a novel with short stories combined into one. I don't know what that original book is like, but I will probably not read it because this book was not good. But I've heard that people that liked that book liked this book, so if that sounds like you, this interest right here might be for you. This just completes my point that if it's not a Darth Vader comic from Disney, it's probably not going to be any good. But anyway, I thought overseeing this, outsourcing this to mangaka would be better. It was not. This story here about the guy being pulled around in the fucking sand by what I assume is Luke Skywalker. By the end, I guess we get our answer. That was a terrible story. And this Empire police officer, whatever he is OCD. He's very clean-cut and very strange about his OCD nature. He's a very mentally ill man in a great way. In a way that makes you cringe. That's the best kind of bad way to read a book. He's awful. I can't stand him. I can't stand that story, matter of fact. And if I ever hear the phrase, "We're all Luke Skywalker," I will jump out of the highest window of the Empire State Building myself. No help. I'll do it myself. Anyway, the next story in here, I, Droid, is about R2-D2, but it's not really about R2-D2. It's kind of like about this one droid that becomes kind of a security slave master robot for these guys. And it's really about how droids are people too. Like, we haven't seen that a billion times in Star Wars. Haven't had it talked about a billion times in Star Wars. The worst case example being the Solo movie that I fucking hate deeply. But this film was about R2-D2 at one point being held captive, and C-3PO shows up at one point to try to whisper to him, hey, I'm here to rescue you. There's a lot of good twists in that story. One big one that I really love quite a bit, and that's a pretty solid story aside from the repetitive nature of this whole droids are people too thing I get so sick of hearing about in these movies and books and shit. But that's a good story. I really like that one. Definitely props to those people. The art on the first story I talked about with the Empire police officer guy, that art looked like shit. Let me show you that real quick. I was not a fan of this, just so you know. Very blotchy and cartoonish. Not a fan of it. But when you go to this second story, the one I was just talking about with R2-D2 and the robot, it looks pretty good. Doesn't look half bad at all. Pretty good stuff. I like that. Now, moving on to the third story in the collection. This one is a retelling of the beginning of Return of the Jedi, when Luke first gives his projection thing to Jabba the Hutt, and he comes to rescue Han Solo and Princess Leia after she's been put in a slave outfit and into slavery, therefore. But this is about a bug. Yes, like a flea, a tick, if you will, talking to different characters. He befriends Leia when he realizes that Leia's a good guy, and he begins to hear not only from the projection he saw from Luke through R2-D2, but when he's talking to Leia, when they become buddies, which is super fucking weird when you think about Carrie Fisher, that snarky, fun persona that she always had, that we always found so charming from her, talking to a fucking bug that the only way they can really communicate is for him to sit on her nose, and she goes cross-eyed looking at him while they try to hold a conversation. Very strange stuff. A lot of the time he'll jump in her ear and talk there, which made me cringe, because I hate bugs. But you might wonder, why does this story come across so offensive? Well, let me tell you. When Return of the Jedi begins, we know from the get-go, the way Luke shows up in Jabba's palace, being a hardcore fan of Luke, you realize at that point there's probably about 2, 3, 5 years, somewhere in there between Empire and Return of the Jedi. Luke has learned from his mistakes. He's probably been training with Yoda. He's probably had a lot of training he's done on his own, and he's learned a lot of shit. He's learned how to build a lightsaber. He has this whole Jedi Knight persona. He's even calling himself a Jedi. Not just kind of being in this middle ground of not really sure of what he is and confident about what he is, like he is in A New Hope or Empire Strikes Back. He knows what he is when Return of the Jedi kicks off, and that's what makes that movie so great and possibly my favorite Star Wars movie. Luke is a badass in general, but he's great in that film, and he knows what he's doing. When he walks into Jabba's palace, he knows how to handle things. And he's a badass, like I said in that particular moment. That's when we all knew something changed about Luke. In this story, the idea is that same bug that is now interested in what Luke Skywalker is, who he is, what Jedi are when he talks to Leia, this bug is actually the reason that Luke does the things that he does, like defeating the Rancor and stuff in the beginning of Return of the Jedi. The only reason Luke was able to do that is because this bug hops onto him too to try to save Luke and tell him how to fight this thing. Not because Luke is smart, not because Luke has a fucking brain, not because Luke is a Jedi and has had training, and he's smart, he knows how to use the Force, he knows how to kind of use the Force in a way that a lot of normies don't know, but you can kind of tell into the future just a little bit. It's like the people who adapted this, or the person who adapted this, Subaru or whatever, does not understand how the Force works, does not understand how Star Wars works, and therefore does not understand how a brain by Luke Skywalker works. It's insulting, and it pissed me off a little bit because it makes Luke out like he's a fucking idiot, and he needs a bug to help him do things as a Jedi. It's cutesy. It's kind of a condescending cutesy, like a modern-day Marvel Comics cutesy sitting around a fucking table in a Starbucks eating some kind of cream pie and drinking some mocha chaka latte, whatever, and acting like we're having a meaningful conversation as fucking superheroes. It's annoying, it's irritating, and it's condescending to people who love Luke Skywalker, and it's condescending, frankly, to the reputation of the fictional, awesome, badass legend, Luke Skywalker. I hate it, that's a big rant, but you needed to hear it. And the art's not that great either. So the final story in here was one that was the least offensive of the bad stories, but it's not a good story. Basically, do you remember in Empire Strikes Back, the big worm thing that came out of the crater that almost ate the Falcon. Do you remember that? That happens in here too, but Luke is driving his X-Wing or whatever, and he has this other chick that's like an archaeologist or a historian or some shit like that. And they accidentally get eaten by this thing, and they're trapped also inside of the mouth of this worm thing, and they have to wait quite a period of time for it to open back up so they can escape. And they're kind of trapped inside of this giant worm thing, wandering around through the caverns and the stomach acid and everything else. And sometimes it can be kind of a fun adventure thing, kind of like the early days of Disney's Star Wars regular mainline comics with Luke, Leia, and Han. But it's Luke and this random chick we never met, and they have this weird flirtatious thing going on, which I don't think is out of character for Luke. Thank God he doesn't feel like the Last Jedi Luke, which is good. But they kind of have this flirtatious thing going on, and Luke has to save her a couple of times. They talk about the Jedi sometimes. But it's mostly them wandering around, meandering around is really the best word to use, inside of a giant space worm that we already saw from Empire, and we forgot about, you know? And while they're in there, they encounter some statues that just made the story even more obnoxious, I guess. I didn't like the story. I see some people out there probably defending the story and saying it's pretty good. Just like the same people that are kind of normies to Star Wars that would probably defend the stupid-ass flea story I just talked about. But this story wasn't offensive like that one was. This one was just forgettable. It was like a one-off issue that you would see, again, from the current Star Wars comics, or at least the later of the Jason Aaron run, whatever it was, the OG Disney Star Wars run that you had before. When you started getting to the trade paperbacks that had like R2-D2 and Yoda, and they'd be like short stories per issue to finish off that run from that guy, that's kind of what this feels like. Therefore, I don't really like it that much. It feels like just a run and go and get it over with type of tale. And the storytelling and the art is good, I guess, but it's bad. It's not a very good tale, to be honest with you. I regret the time that I could have put towards a lot of the other comics and manga that I bought recently, a lot of the novels that I've started and have not finished yet that I've been trying to read lately. I've been wanting a little bit of a change up for movies and TV shows, so I've been reading a little bit, but not a ton. Got through this in about a week because I wasn't reading a ton on this, and it was bad. I regret the time and the money that I spent on this, and I'll never get it back. So if you're a fan of the original book, maybe you'll like this more. If this sounds like shit, and I hope it does, for the hardcore Luke and Star Wars fans out there, don't read it. It's not worth the $15 that I paid for this turd. $5 a story, almost. If it was a full 20 bucks, it'd be $5 a piece, and it was not good. And by the way, why the fuck on the back of the book do they have a quote from Rey? Luke Skywalker, I thought he was a myth. Get the fuck out of here, Rey. I don't even mind her in Rise of Skywalker that much, because I don't mind that movie that much, but why? Why is Rey being quoted on the back of this? I understand it's the theme of myth and legend. I understand that. But it's Luke. You know Luke exists. It just, whatever. Luke Skywalker, The Legends of Luke Skywalker, the manga, as it capitalizes on the title, is a bad book. It has that one decent story in there called I, Droid, and one kind of forgettable, okay, non-offensive story about the Big Inside, or whatever it was called, of the worm. And that's it. Everything else is obnoxious, it's stupid, some of the art styles are bad. It's a mess. I don't recommend it at all, and if I had to rate it on a 5-star basis, I'd give it like a 2 out of 5 stars. Closer to a 1, but it'd get a 2 because of the I, Droid story for me. But anyway, have you read it? What do you think about it? I'd love to hear your thoughts and comments down below in the comments section about this book, or this version of the book, and the original story from, what was his name? Ken Liu, I think is his name? I guess, the guy who wrote the original short story collection that I'll never read. Thank you guys, God bless you all, catch you later, and goodbye.